Hello, welcome everyone of you to today's AFD Tech Talk, which is on AI and linguistic diversity in Africa in particular. So AI and linguistic diversity in Africa. This is a very good topic that we've been looking forward to having conversation on that, given the rise of generative AI solutions, Chat GPT, which I see most of you might have already heard of it. And those who don't even know about AI have started leveraging on such technologies to be able to address certain use cases, right? So I will just give a bit of the context of this particular event and give you the run show. So um, yeah, the event will be in this particular form. So in some few minutes, Claire will be introducing our distinguished speaker, and then the speaker will have about 30 minutes to give his talk. And then it will be followed up with some questions that we have and some questions that were asked by some colleagues at the AFD and also those who contacted us online. We'll be dropping some of these questions down, and then we will also welcome questions from the audience, which that's what we actually interested in. So we'll be looking forward to your questions and ways in which we can move forward on this particular important subject matter. So I would like to thank Odas, the speaker, who will be introduced in some few minutes. And I would like to thank all of you for making time to join us today. And as I talked about, this event will be looking at, AI and linguistic diversity, especially in Africa, given that we have close to 3,000 African languages, right? I mean, with dialects included. Um, and we'll be looking at the current states of these particular issue in the continent, try to understand some of the obstacles, notably the data problem, right, that we have in addressing some of these issues, obviously infrastructural and all those particular related stuff, and then have a case study on how to overcome these particular data shortage. And we at AFD are also looking at this from different angles to see how best we can help support initiatives like that. So we will like to have your comments on that. You can use the question tab on your right corner of the screen. So you have the question tab that you can use to throw in your questions. And then you also have the chat button that I will invite you to at least tell us where you are listening from. I mean, where you're joining us from, right? I think it would be great. Let us know where you're joining us from. And welcome to all of you again. Um, so I'll pass over to Claire, who will briefly introduce today's speaker. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Peter. Hello everyone, and welcome to our Tech Talk. So, the speaker of our session today is Odas Nyonkuru. So, welcome, Odas, and thank you very much for being here with us. Odas is a founder of Digital Umuganda, which is an AI and open data firm in Kigali, in Rwanda. He has an ambitious goal of using AI backed voice interaction technology to bridge the digital divide gap in Africa, which is the subject of our session today. And so, to reach that goal, he is overseeing the process of having the first open voice data set in Kinyarwanda, sorry for the pronunciation if I'm bad, as one of the underrepresented language, so which is an African language, obviously. But that's not all. Actually, Digital Muganda is scaling this effort to other African language with the mission to increase the availability of open and publicly available datasets in African language. So we will very be pleased to know more during the session. So welcome again, Odas. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, and um, thank you for everyone who has joined. Just to briefly present myself again, I'm Odas Nyong'u. I'm based in Kigali, Rwanda, and I'm founder and CEO of Digital Muganda. So we are an artificial intelligence and open data company working on natural language processing for African languages, overseeing the creation and also sharing and making public open voice datasets to basically enable access to information and services in local languages for the population. Just to kick off, I wanted to first touch on the language part before I go into the AI part. So basically, if you look at the African continent, we have more than between 2,000 and 3,000 languages, with I think recent estimates at 2,140 languages on the continent. These are very, it's a lot of languages for the 52 countries. So if you're trying to do an average, you'll end up with something like around 40 languages per country. That's obviously an average with some countries like Rwanda with one official language, but also other languages. So out of these languages, actually, you have 75% of them have more than 1 million speakers. So they're not just minor languages. These are languages that are large, that are very widely spoken, and that ease the flow of people and goods across the continent. And you can mainly categorize them in four main parts. So you have the Niger-Congo languages, which are the by far the largest. So it's estimated that between 1,350 and 1,650 languages belong to the Niger-Congo languages. And these are basically the major ones, Yoruba, Igbo, and Swahili, with more than 200 million speakers. And they're followed by Afro-Asiatic languages. So you have languages like Somali, spoken I think by 21 million, and they're mostly found around the Horn of Africa, with around 200 to 300 languages in the Afro-Asiatic part. The other category is the Nilo-Saharan. These are mostly found in the area of Kenya, coming down. Can speak about languages like Kalenjin, Dinka, and others. And then as you go down to the south, you have more Khoisan. I hope that I'm reading that right. But they're also called click languages. So if you know those languages in Southern Africa, like that are more that have a click in them, they're estimated to be between 40 and 70, and mostly found in the southern part. So in brief, in a nutshell, this is the linguistic diversity. If you look at the continent, I started from up going down, but I should also mention that there's also a distinction meant, because the distinction is that
I think we lost our speaker. He'll be rejoining us in some few minutes or seconds, if I'm not mistaken. So, as he was talking about, the African continent holds a large diversity of languages, right? And you have close to 3,000 languages, and more than 75% have more than 1 million speakers, right? And given the rise of there's new innovations around AI, right, in technology, the question that arises is how best are we able to build inclusive solutions, right? How best are we able to build inclusive solutions, especially in the African continent, where you have this diversity of language? So I'm just chipping in as we wait for our speaker to rejoin. And you notice that the question of education is key. I mean, people learning, imagine you learning science, physics, mathematics in your own language, right? In local languages, I think you will understand it much more better than learning a foreign language like English or French, that might not be very, easy for people to learn in some of these regions, right? So ensuring that language plays a role in building innovative initiatives or solutions is very important to boost how do you call it, economic growth and also inclusion in the way we do things, right? I noticed that our speaker is trying to reconnect. I don't know if it's there, but I'll keep up the conversation as we wait for him to get him back online, right? So like I was saying that education is a key area if we want to boost economic growth, right? And also to boost what we call citizens engagement, right? So if we want to boost citizens engagement in democratic process, right, in building new policies, it is important that citizens are able to engage with policymakers, are able to access information and to be able to have dialogues, right? To be able to boost economic growth, democratic processes, especially in countries or in regions where you have a diversity of languages. And given the rise of especially AI, we can see that there is a big opportunity to leverage on some of these languages. I noticed Das is back, and I'll let him continue the talk.
Yes, thank you, Ada, for chipping in. So I was mentioning the diversity of the languages and how these can be categorized in African languages, but there's also languages spoken on the continent. These are, there can be languages like Afrikaans that is spoken on the continent that might not be in the initial classification of African languages, but which are still languages spoken on the continent. Another classification is Pidgin. Pidgin, these are languages that are born out of a mixture of local languages mixing with I'd say other languages from other continents. I'd speak like the Nigerian Pidgin, which is spoken in Nigeria, but also furthermore, now once they're adopted, you can also go further to a classification of that's mostly known as Creole. That's most relevant on the in the Caribbean, but also in Africa. If you take a language that has adopted that mixture and gone through the phase of pidgin, and now is accepted. So if you look at Swahili, which is basically a mix of Arabic and local African languages that has been adopted, and is greatly used, especially in Southern Africa, then you understand how this diversity is important. And just for comparison, so if you look at the number of languages spoken on the continent, and you look at the number of languages spoken, for example, in Europe, you can see that in Africa you have 2,000 languages, and in Europe you have between 200 and 300 languages. And also considering the population, you'd see that you have 700 million people in Africa and almost 1.3 billion in 700 in Europe and 1.3 billion in Africa. So it couldn't also explain the large diversity. So there are a lot of explanations for this, but just for the sake of kicking off the conversation, I hope that this gives a picture on how diverse, linguistically diverse Africa is. Now, when you look at AI and African languages, now you understand that there is actually a huge gap in making AI solutions work in the local setting. For example, I think Peter actually started with the elephant in the room, which is ChatGPT. But if you try to talk to ChatGPT, for example, I'll just give an example. So here, we just asked, what's the capital of Kenya? Of course, the mighty ChatGPT knows the capital of Kenya is Nairobi. Now, if you try asking that in Kinyarwanda, the answer is not trained to answer you in Kinyarwanda. Yeah, so I think that shows that if we don't put in place the necessary requirements, and here I'm going to talk specifically about data sets, we risk having a huge digital divide gap where people on the continent who cannot speak foreign languages like English and French do not get access to AI services because they're in languages they don't speak. And second, even those who speak, because of the diversity of the accents that exist on the continent. For example, if you take African, like a Nigerian accent or Ugandan accent, and use it on major AI tools, it's still not going to respond to you, even though you're speaking in English. Or if you look at French, Ivorian French, or other types of French spoken on the continent, major AI tools still fail to respond because of the bias or the lack of diversity in the datasets that were used to train these solutions. So it's important on one part to provide solutions or information or AI services to everyone, but on the second part, now you have the risk of languages disappearing. So if you look statistically, 13% of languages on the continent are endangered. I know this is a small percentage compared to other parts of the world, but it's still a growing number. Now you can imagine if to access the digital world and as digital transformation takes roots in the everyday lives of Rwandans or Africans in general, they'll have to adapt to foreign languages in order to be able to receive those services. And in preserving and making sure that the languages do not disappear, then it's important that just in the digital world, efforts that are there to preserve preserve languages are not hindered or succumbed by tools or digital tools, because the world is being transformed digitally and accessing basic services like banking, getting information, education, and others are not in their languages. And this is specifically why, starting in 2019,
hold on, Odas. Hello.
yes, I
So
can hear
if
you.
just to pick that, because I think you're making a very strong and interesting claim that AI, or the role of AI can play a key in preserving some of these indigenous languages, right? And if I understood you well, the claim here is that if we leverage on, let's say, I mean, we have francophone, anglophone. Let's say we stick to these two categories, and countries tend to learn, I mean, only French or English. This can also lead to loss of some of these languages, because children or the youth, given that African is the youngest population, the youth will tend to learn only some of these foreign languages, if I put it that way, instead of leveraging on their own local language to be able to make progress. Is that the argument here, that AI can play a role?
Yes, exactly. And it's something that we actually saw when implementing some of the digital solutions. It's when we try to, localize some of the streams, let's say on a website, into, standard Kinyarwanda, you would find the younger population not understanding exactly what that word means if it's in a local language, as opposed to let's say if it was in French or English. I mean, you can understand now, in 10, 15 years of digital transformation and the takeover of the fourth industrial revolution, where these digital tools will be used practically for everything, and they are not in these local languages, they're simply going to disappear, because I mean, the young population grew up in an era where they were not spoken, simply because the majority of interaction will be digitally, transmitted. So
Wow.
yeah, that's yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Thanks so much for bringing this up. Just for the information of participants also joining us online, we discuss an AI and linguistic diversity in Africa, and Odas is actually giving the talk around that. And Odas, as you know, AFD is working in about 115 countries, right? And mostly also in African countries, right? And sometimes we do have publications, right? We do have publications, and we have it. I mean, currently we have English and French, but sometimes we try to add other languages like Portuguese and Spanish, right? Uh, but you raising this issue about languages makes us start looking at the possibility of really interacting with people in these countries, right? And being close to them through languages. So, um, meaning, I mean, it means that we as development organizations also need to probably start considering the issue of languages if we are interested in probably collaborating much more deeper with these countries. Does that make sense? What do you think? And then I'll let you
um,
continue to talk here.
yes, I think that we still also need to consider that even beyond preserving, there's a very big population. I think if you look at the state of the internet today, I mean, close to 50% of the internet is in English, where only 5% of the world population speaks English natively. So you can imagine, when we say that the world is connected, information is free, you can access free resources like Wikipedia and everything. But if these are not in the local languages, then basically what is there is that you have the access, but people are not adopting the use of the internet. And I think that's where even the conversation started about meaningful connectivity, where it's not just about coverage, but also ensuring that information and services are in formats and languages that people understand. Because if you just give people access to an internet that is foreign to them, then the adoption as well would be won't be as much as it would be if it was in a language they would understand, for example. And I think this is mostly, if you look at internet adoption, just on the continent, people using or buying smartphones because there's more access to local content. For example, on YouTube, there's more access, to local content through WhatsApp statuses or many things like that. So it shows how the power of localization and language is even in the adoption of digital tools at large. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. In the meantime, I mean, as you continue, I'll be chipping up with questions that comes from our audience as you present. So I'll let you continue that.
Great. Yeah. So as I was mentioning, actually, that's where the project of building open and publicly available data sets started. And the idea was that if there's an open and publicly available infrastructure, which is a language data set, then innovators and researchers will have access to it. So it won't just be limited to big tech, but a local ecosystem who know the local challenges and can build up local solutions will have a starting point. So that's how in 2019 we started collecting the Kinyarwanda Open Voice data set. And I think that maybe I didn't explain at first what the name of the company Digital Umuganda means, but I think I was saving it for this moment to also understand how it interacts with the process of what we do. So basically, if you look at Umuganda, so it's community-driven practice towards building infrastructure. So normally it's done for physical infrastructure, and it's done in communities in Rwanda. I've heard that there are similar practices across Africa and elsewhere, where the community gets together and build and works on something. So it can be maybe building a classroom or fixing a community road or cleaning the streets. So in Rwanda, it's a practice that's done every last Saturday of the month. So people in the morning wake up and go in their communities and work, can be planting trees or something that the community needs and identifies. So the idea was, when we started, we evaluated and said what local practice can resemble what we have in the open source community. So we looked for something where people would be familiar with the practice and understand, even those not familiar with tech, that is towards building a common infrastructure that can be used, by everyone and towards the common good. So basically, what we did is we say, if this works for physical infrastructure, then let's try it for digital infrastructure, because it's something everybody knows and understands, and people will get the concept even if they're not familiar with tech. And the reason behind it was also that if you're looking at automated speech recognition, you need a lot of speakers. So you need a lot of diverse people to also avoid bias or to also avoid mimicking the problem you're trying to solve, which is diversity, by only getting maybe a certain accent or a certain edge. So you need diversity in the contributors that are contributing. So with a large number, we said we're not going to limit ourselves to to a practice only the tech community or the digitally literate know, but let's look for something that combines both worlds. So the digital sphere and the physical sphere, and that's how we started actually conducting events called Digital Umuganda, which basically we go to communities. We started in universities, but also go to different communities. We hold public events where contributors come and basically contribute towards building an open data set. And over the last 4 years, actually, we've built the Kenya-Rwanda data set from zero to now. We have more than 2,400 hours of automated speech recognition, and more than 2,000 hours of those are curated. And these are by more than 1,000 speakers that we gather together in events such as those, to build these open data sets. So we did that in so far more than 242 data collections. Some are physical and some are virtual, because as you know, for the last few years, with the emergence of COVID, physical events, the huge challenge was also that you couldn't hold physical events. So we tried to also use virtual events to collect this type of data. And right now, through those efforts, Kenya Rwanda is the largest open voice data sets for automated speech recognition of any African language. And actually, we are leveraging this experience in expanding to other African languages with the same mission to ensure that there's a level playing ground for research and innovators to be able to build solutions. But in doing that, I think one thing that's really important, and to not, as I said, mimic the problem you're trying to solve, is the ethical consideration of how you conduct these data collections. So one thing that we wanted to do was have anti-bias measures. And those anti-bias measures, basically how we implemented them in these data collections, is that they were decentralized, first of all. So basically, it was not only the mobilizers that knew these anti-bias measures, like the data set needs to be gender balanced, it needs to be age balanced, it needs to be accent balanced. So what we did was that the contributors themselves that were contributing their time towards verifying or validating contributions, we would hold trainings for them so that they understand if you hear more male voices, please give feedbacks, because that means that the ending result of the data set will be biased towards a certain gender. And that's actually something that we had, where at the start of the contribution, we had more male contributors, and actually to know it was through the feedback of the contributors that mentioned we're hearing a lot of male contributors. Why is that, and how can that be changed? So I think that decentralizing your anti-bias measures in collecting data is really essential, because through the whole value chain, everybody needs to understand the consequences of a data set that is biased towards a certain gender, race, accent, or age group.
So that's just, let me just chip in there. Sorry, on this issue of contributors, right? So you talked about them being how do you call it? You building some kind of capacity and training for people to be able to collect such data sets. When this issue about chat GPT or GPT in general came in, I mean, there were issues about how it handled violent, right, content and all those stuff, right? In your case, I mean, open voice data sets, in terms of annotating some of these data, right, or labeling, some of these data. How do you handle these some of these issues, right? How did you go about handling some of these issues, right? Just to get a clear picture. So that's the first one, and the second one is to find out whether contributors were paid or it was pretty open, right? I mean, you're talking about scaling it up to other countries, so just to understand some of the lessons learned on that. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so as I mentioned, in terms of contributors, what we wanted to implement was a voluntary contribution. Of course, that we could facilitate with internet, we could facilitate with the venue, we basically facilitate with the logistical part, but we worked more with communities themselves that understood, because we did a lot of work in mobilizing and making them understand that the outcome or the results will result, one, in preserving the language, and two, in solutions being developed that can be used. And I think that the first part was the largest number of our contributors were interested in the first part, which is we want to use solutions in Kinyarwanda. We want also to preserve Kinyarwanda, for example. And if I'm going to spend 1 hour or so here, then yeah, I'm going to do that. So, but as I said, it needs to be in a framework that people understand. So that's why we used a practice that people already are used to, which was I guess at some point self-explanatory to them, which is this is a voluntary contribution. Of course, we can facilitate logistically for you to be able to contribute, but the infrastructure that's coming out will be open and publicly accessible to be used. That's why a lot of our contributors came from language sector, university students studying language or studying computer, or even people interested in tech saying, "Oh, I want to be able to use these solutions in my local language." Another actually part of our contributors that we had was people living with visual disabilities, because one of the things that they mentioned to us was the screen readers and the tools we have. We use those for English. So if we try to adapt them, let's say to Kinyarwanda, or to understand, maybe to be able to read a text message or read a document in Kinyarwanda at work, the screen reader that I'm using is not adapted to it. So I want to be able to have to contribute towards building this infrastructure so that I can be able to use these tools in Kinyarwanda, and because I know the end goal is something that I'll benefit from. I'll ask you to remind me the first questions. I started with the second, but you could just remind me the first question you asked, so I also address it. Hi, Ado.
Yes. So so that's pretty good. Let me see if I can pick up some few questions from the floor, if that's fine, because I have so many things to talk about. That resonates with you? Can I pick questions from the floor?
Oh, it's okay. It's all right as well. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll pick one or two questions from the floor, and then we'll continue the conversation. There was one question. Okay, so one, could AI facilitate translations of lessons given, for example, in Kinyarwanda into other less spoken local languages? I mean, there's a question from Kazitu. So I mean, she's really talking about whether translation is possible, right? Um, Specifically, there was also a question on frameworks, right? Which is also very interesting for us. do you have frameworks or plans to bridge the gap for important, crucial knowledge domains where African languages are lacking, right? So um, that is also a very brilliant question. Whether do we have plans? I think that goes to you, but also to us as an organization. Are there plans to be able to support that, right? If we to bridge this particular gap, like earlier on when you were off for some time, I was talking about um, languages. For instance, we all know, like, the Bible is, it has been translated in so many languages in Africa. For instance, in Ghana you have Twi, you have Ga, I mean, so many local languages, but we don't have physics books, we don't have mathematics books being translated in some of these languages, right? And or medicine, right? I mean, plant medicine and all those things, such knowledge. So um, well, I mean, this raises questions as to how do we preserve not just local language, but also preserve knowledge domains like herbal medicine and all those stuffs. I'll let you react to it. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think machine translation is a really interesting one, because the power of machine translation, and we looking at the linguistic diversity of Africa, you can understand how the linguistic diversity can also at the same time be a barrier to things like trade, like free movement of people and other things. So this is one of those areas where actually AI tools and then natural language processing tools could facilitate in the socioeconomic development of the continent. And it's actually something that we've been working on as well. And one of the challenges that it is that machine translation is mainly domain specific. So, for example, if you look at, if you want to translate probably AI terminology into a certain language, then you will need to have a training data set of those terminologies. I think the second part is that I'll speak, for example, in Kinyarwanda. You looked at the technical terminologies, as I said before, are not known by the younger generation. So if we're trying to translate, for example, digital words or AI words, if we have them in Kinyarwanda, people are not going to know what they mean. And this happened actually 2 months ago. So we got together and we were about to launch automated speech recognition engines and text-to-speech engines in Kinyarwanda. And so we worked with the Rwanda Academy of Language and Culture to really get these terminologies in the local languages. But what we found is that a lot of people were still trying to understand what do those words mean. And it's unfortunate that when you say the word in you have to explain using the word in English or French for them to be able to understand. And it actually relates to the part that I was talking about earlier. But yeah, on two sides. Machine translation is something that we're working on. It has its own sort of challenges, but the opportunity is immense. I would encourage anyone, even in the audience, who works on natural language processing, to really look at machine translation, especially between African languages. So if a trader from Rwanda can go to Senegal and be able to trade in Wolof while speaking Kinyarwanda, then even the efforts being made to ease trade on the continent can be facilitated. I mean, that's basically my comments on that. It's something that we work on. It's something with its own set of challenges due to lack of data sets in those languages, and we have to also understand that there are languages that are spoken and not written. So that creates a set of challenges on its side. but the opportunity of solving that challenge is also immense.
Yeah, I mean, thanks so much. Thanks so much on that. You've not touched so much on infrastructure, right, and governance of such. I mean, there's a question that came on just like that. I mean, governance of these language data sets, right? Because we know if these are not responsibly done, or we don't have the right data stewardship, that raises questions, right? So I'm just wondering, I mean, also based on your work on the Internet Governance Forum, right? I'm just wondering what are some of your thoughts on that? What are some of the potential risks, right, associated in making such open voice language data sets, right, available for to business and entrepreneurs and also to the public? I don't know what are their potential risk and what can we do to ensure that they are responsibly used and not to boost manipulation or orchestrate disinformation, misinformation. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yes. So data governance is one major topic that's really important to the scaling or the adoption of AI on the continent. Because on one side, you need legal frameworks in place, legal frameworks and policies in place that protect the users, but also encourage innovation. So it's to strike the perfect balance between how do we protect users in the way data is collected, in the way it's stored, in the way it's shared, in the way it's used or reused, but also at the same time, letting the researchers and innovators be able to, do the work, advance, scientific research and build innovations that bring about social economic, advancements and prosperity. So I think that's the largest. I think the largest topic in terms of how do we, hit that perfect balance between those two. Now, if you look at the continent, a lot of the countries still don't have data privacy laws or data protection laws. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there were 19. There were 19 data countries that were implementing that at the moment, and this causes a lot of problems because I think on one, you have innovators that are being denied open and publicly, that data that should be open and publicly available because the authorities or the gatekeepers of data don't understand the difference between data that's personal and data that can be shared. So that's one thing. And then on the second hand, you have data by users that's being exploited in ways that can cause harm. And those two will stifle innovation in the long run, and will also create a huge danger for the users that really have shared the data even without consenting, but at the same time, even without having the right understanding of even what consent is in the first place. So I think data governance is something that should be there, but at the same time, that should reflect the current realities of the continent. So, for example, one thing that needs to be there is that on the global understanding of these data principles and strategies and policies, they need not to only look at the global north, but really have the global south inputs in order to reflect the realities that are also might be different. So they need to be, of course, rooted in human rights frameworks and understand current realities of those countries, but also at the same time participate in a global conversation, in bringing about global standards that can be shared and adopted across the globe. So, for example, if you look at countries that might have data localization laws, that prohibit data from being processed from outside the country, then those needs to be very explicit and detailed, because only 1% of the co-location data centers are in Africa, and 80% of those of data center co-location data centers are in developed countries. So the law and policymakers need to understand how to also implement these strategies and laws and put them in place so that they don't stifle innovation by implementing things that don't reflect current realities of those economies or those nations. So yeah, I think that's basically one thing to note around data governance. I'm not sure if you also asked about skills. I had actually a slide on the other issues other than data that hindered development of AI, and so if you look at the content, one of the biggest challenges is also how do we ensure that we create those skills locally, so that you don't just put there an open data set and there's no local value creation. It's used only by big techs that actually already have the resources to build their own data sets. So there needs to be capacity building accompanying the availability of the data set. And I think we're fortunate here on the ground. I always say this, that in Rwanda with the Carnegie Mellon University and Agence, so Africa Institute of Mathematical Sciences, that offer courses in AI. So we're able to have access to machine learning engineers, but it's also important to see not only how do we build the capacity locally, but also how do we maintain also to avoid brain drainage of these talents leaving the continent. So yeah, that's also one important part around skills development. In terms of infrastructure, yeah, as I was mentioning, so if you look at the continent, only 1% of the co-location centers are in Africa, and a lot of countries are starting to implement data localization laws. And if this is not implemented with reflection to the current realities, which is the availability of computing power on the continent, it can be a big stifle to the continent in terms of innovation. And what you have is just a repetition of the last industrial revolution, where you have raw materials, in this case data, produced locally and exported, and then processed, and the end or finished products are sold back on the continent. So yeah, we need to ensure that in the next future, 10 years from now, where AI tools will be prevalent at every stage or in the course of life, Africa is not left to be mere consumers and still producing raw materials, which will be data, and consuming the end products with no local value creation by the local innovators. And I think the other part, which is really important, is for the continent to have countries themselves to have national AI strategies to understand how data flows will be. So how will data be created? How will it be shared? How will the private sector, so the startups on the continent, be supported? And in terms of conducive legal frameworks, in terms of other kinds of support that can be there, how will the capacity building be put in place? How will the adoption also by the public sector or the private sector be encouraged? but also more importantly, how will the users be protected from harmful exploitation of their personal data. So I think that's those are the 4 key points, factors, other than availability of data, that really present challenges, but also opportunities of taking advantage of the fourth industrial revolution to in turn bring about social economic development on the continent.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So much rich information. And as you speak, I mean, the more you talk about some of these issues, more questions keep springing up. And I noticed that you've addressed some of the concerns. I mean, some of the questions that have also been placed on the chat. I mean, you talked about ensuring also capacity building, right? Especially for policymakers, right? And one I remember last year we did organize an event with the Lawyers Hub in Kenya on the African EU AI policy dialogue, where we invited parliamentarian, and also I remember we had a colleague from UNESCO. And one of the issues that actually came out was like, I mean, if parliamentarians or policymakers do not even understand, right, some of these concepts, right, how are they able to enact the right policies to be able to boost innovations, right? And I noticed that UNESCO had just released a competence framework on for civil servants to boost capacity building. One of the things that probably we haven't yet uh, touched on. You also talked about the AI national strategies, which I see that, I mean, there are initiatives actually springing up, but we've not seen a lot of AI strategies, national strategies on the African continent, right? And that that raises questions as to what are some of the challenges that you are facing, right, in building some of these initiatives. So that's the first one. And the other issue that I will like us to talk a little bit on has to do with with the rise of some of these algorithms and techniques using transformers or GPT. One of the concerns that have been raised has to do with the environmental cost, right? In building inclusive how they call it, solutions when it comes with large language models, right? I know you're working with open voice data sets, but I'm just wondering, should we have more language data sets? It also leads to language models, obviously, to build some of these solutions. Um, what's your take on the environmental impacts or the CO2 emissions, right, associated with some of these large language models? Should we be concerned about that? And what can be done? I don't know. Just random thoughts on that. I don't know what you think about. Right. Thanks. Others.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ado. I think so. The challenges that we meet are obviously also reflected in the presentation. If you look at, for example, let me start with the first part of the value chain, which is collecting data. For example, one of the biggest challenges that we met was if we go and ask about, open and publicly available data from an institution, let's say government institution, and they say, oh, we don't know if we can share this information. Of course, that's because there's lack of clear, concise laws around how data can be shared. And this brings about challenge of, I don't want to take the responsibility of sharing this data in case it's data that shouldn't be shared. So I think the lack of clear and concise data laws and data regulation is one challenge. Because, for example, if you're collecting audio data in a foreign country, if you don't have the right administrative sign-offs, it can be a huge challenge or looked as a security risk, even if you're just collecting open and publicly available data. So the lack of clear laws in terms of the way data is collected, stored, and shared really pose a big challenge in advancing AI. And it's a challenge that we have met many times. I think even when we talk about now, if you move along and say you're going to implement maybe an AI solution in health, if the laws around data anonymization are not very clear, then you won't get access to that data. So what I mean is that there's a general consensus that data anonymization is you have to anonymize it up to a certain point where it cannot be reverse engineered for the original creator of that data to be identified. But there's no benchmark or checklist on really what needs to be anonymized. Is it the name number or their names or anything else? So there needs to be very clear guidelines in terms of data laws and regulations. I think the second part is around the infrastructure. So if you look at computing power, it's still very very compute intensive. So the cost of training models is still very high, and that now coupled with a small talent pool now brings about a problem even beyond collecting the data. How do you train these models so that they can be used? So the part also on skills and computing costs is still a challenge. However, I think there are efforts to do this around the continent. For example, I think there are courses and universities like Agence setting up on different parts of the continent to build solutions to these challenges that exist, but also work around standardizing globally data governance and AI governance issues, so that they can be frameworks that have global north and global south inputs that can be easily adopted and localized to the local setting. So I think even though these challenges exist, I think that now the Internet Governance Forum is working on a policy network, basically on data and AI governance, to be able to try to bring together inputs from across the world on global standards on the way data and AI is governed. Yeah.
Yes, thanks so much on bringing some of these things to light. One of the reasons why I actually talked about raised this particular question on the environmental impacts is that with obviously the rise of these generative large language models, right? Already there are a lot of questions as to the CO2 emissions on that, right? And we know that some of the existing models that are currently being used are basically autoregressive um, um, large language models, like based on autoregressive approaches and transformers, which raises questions as to whether there'll be new tools, right, or new algorithms to be able to handle some of these concerns that have been raised. And given the recent letter that was to have a halt on AI development for 6 months, which I'm not so into that, um, it raises questions as to whether we are all moving in the right direction or not, right? So that's why I was bringing some of these things on the table on environmental impacts. And I recall that, I mean, for instance, when we look at infrastructure, I don't know what infrastructure you use. I mean, do you have like you're working on data centers that are locally, I mean, country-based data centers, or these are data centers from the global north, right? Because the issue of sovereignty also raises a bit of an issue. And there's also another comment as to whether we have green data centers to be able to handle uh, such issues, right? So the question that arises is that is the environmental impacts, the environmental costs of building these language models really an issue in Africa, or for now, not really, you know?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Ado. I think that um, one thing that I also mentioned in the presentation is that ethical consideration needs to be intentional. I think that when building, models with billions of parameters that basically will run on thousands of GPUs, that will definitely have a carbon footprint that's large. So I think it's up to AI practitioners in general to really look at how do we build AI tools more efficiently, so that the amount of computing power they are consuming is low, so the carbon footprint is also low. But also, yeah, I think that's another good idea of probably having a list of green clouds or cloud providers or data centers that can be used, where because I think that the problem goes beyond AI. So there's a certain responsibility that falls on AI practitioners in terms of how do we build AI more efficiently without consuming a lot of computing power, and hence reducing the carbon footprint of AI. But also these data centers depend on which type of energy they're running on. I see that a lot of international or big tech companies are moving towards greener sources of electricity, and I think it would actually be a good idea to have a list of green cloud providers, so that there can be a conscious decision when choosing a cloud provider into what's the carbon footprint. Maybe we could have something out one on airplane tickets, where the carbon footprint of your journey, so that if you're going to train on billions of parameters, you're also conscious about the carbon footprint of the work you're doing. So I think the responsibility falls on all stakeholders, but it's up to practitioners in particular to be intentional about the ethical consideration on what damages will this have on the environment, and how better can we efficiently build these AI tools. Yeah.
Great, thanks so much. I mean, you've done justice to some of the questions that have been raised, and I'm so glad we've touched on so many issues. I mean, the more you talk, so many things come in to the table. And I mean, somebody was asking questions as to whether do we have resources published online. Yes, at AFD, we on the AFD website, you will have a link to our publications at AFD, right? So, and the resource tab, Claire will be dropping it on the chat. So we have a lot of publications, policy paper, research papers on these particular topics, right? And at the same time, I've just shared with you a work that the OECD experts of on AI published recently on measuring the environmental carbon footprint of AI, right? Um, but it's quite at the global front. And Odas also talked about building standards, right? So how do we build standards, taking into account the environment, the local environment, and also the culture, right? It raises so many issues on that. Um, before we go, I'm just checking whether we can have last question on the question tab. But for now, if others can tell us, should you have a wish for AFD to support an initiative, right, or a public development bank to support an initiative, where will you put the weight on, right? For instance, probably financing data sets, African language data sets, infrastructure, skills, capacity building. Where do you see us putting our weight on? And also, given that we work in about 115 countries, and obviously we have publications all over, how best do we transmit such knowledge and also such lessons learned to the countries that we work? I mean, the person talked about where we have our resources. So, is it in terms of our publications, right? Should we have audio versions about it, given that you have audio language data sets? Do we have it in local language? The best way to move forward? I don't know. Just a last say, I mean, from your side as we end the conversation.
I think that's a tough one. I think it's very hard not to be biased because I work on open data. But I think the two, I'd say, main challenges. I think one thing that I've seen is that the lack of, of data sets is a relevant problem across the continent. There are different initiatives that are there to support in creation of this, but there's still lack of data set. I think the second part I would say is around um, the governance, because uh, I think the consequences of of data laws or regulations that are not localized or that are not clear and concise could lead to devastating, um, um, uh, devastating consequences in the future, because it will affect all the stakeholders. So we're talking about sovereignty. You can imagine, you know, um, if data is being shipped outside of the country, you can talk about data protection. So if private information, personal information is being misused, and you can talk about barriers of innovators and researchers not getting access to data that should be shareable or not being able to share it, or cross data flow between countries that could, boost better decision making. So I think that true standards that are shared and understood and clear and concise are really important uh, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is because it's a factor that I've seen on the continent be that is overlooked, but the heaviness of it is really important because it cross cuts across all the stakeholders in the entire value chain. And as digital transformation takes foot in everyday lives, the consequences will be larger and larger, and it could be at a point where reversing them could, be impossible, take a lot of work. So, yeah, I think on one side you need the necessary data sets and infrastructure to boost scientific research and innovation, but also need to be intentional about protecting the users and protecting the entire ecosystem against harms that individuals or entities could come up with by exploiting data or not even sharing data in the first place. Yeah.
Thank you so much. On this note, I'll say a big thank you to our speaker Odas for this excellent talk. So engaging, so many stuff. I mean, if you were checking on the chat, so many things drop. I mean, so many questions and discussions ongoing on this particular issue. But unfortunately, we have to end now and pick up the conversation probably later again. And thanks so much for the suggestion. As to what we can do, because we're also looking for opportunities to move forward on this particular topic, and we are likely to invite you again at the AFD on to have discussions and how best we can even support and even scale up some of the stuff that you have talked about. And on this note, I also like to thank all the participants for making time to join us from several countries, and thank you so much, and also from several organizations. I would like to say a big thank you to all of you. The talk will be yeah, somebody's asking, is it possible to talk? Yeah, it would be great. Yeah, just contact us and then we'll reach out to you. We will also be preparing in a few weeks to months as to our next talk. So keep we'll keep you posted when it's time to have the next talk. And then we'd like to also say a big thank you to our technical team, Sylvie and Delphine at the backstage, for their support and ensuring that this event has become a success. Thanks to all of you. Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Amina. Thanks to all of you, and have a great day, and bye for now. Thank you.